"Hey, I'm staying with a friend tonight. I'll be home tomorrow." Those were the last words 18-year-old Marissa DiNapoli would ever send to her family. At 9:16 p.m. on June 28, 2025, in the quiet town of Morgan Hill, California, a simple text message would become the final thread connecting a vibrant young woman to the world she was about to leave forever. What happened in the next 7 days would shatter a tight-knit community and expose a deadly pattern hiding in plain sight. When Marissa's body was discovered near Anderson Lake, stabbed 5 times in the back, the truth wasn't just shocking. It revealed a nightmare that everyone saw coming, but no one could stop. The most chilling part of this case isn't the brutal murder itself. It's that Marissa DiNapoli had told her best friend exactly what Martin Mendoza would do to her. She had whispered the words weeks before. "He would kill me. He would not stop. He's obsessed with me, he's crazy, and he's willing to go to that extent." Her prediction came true with devastating accuracy. Ring camera footage would capture their final moments together, Marissa looking visibly apprehensive as Mendoza confronted her about texting another man. Cell phone data would place them both near the remote lake where her body was found. His immediate flight to Mexico after she was reported missing would seal his fate. But the case that should have been solved in hours stretched into a week-long manhunt. A family's allegations of police bias would turn a murder investigation into a community's fight for justice. If this case already has you questioning everything, hit like and stay with me for a story that will change how you see the warning signs. The question that haunts everyone who knew Marissa DiNapoli isn't just who killed her. It's why the person she told exactly what would happen couldn't save her life. Marissa DiNapoli was everything a small town celebrates. A recent high school graduate who worked the morning shift at the local Starbucks, she was the kind of person her teacher Tara Guerrero described as full of potential, with a big heart and an infectious smile. Her sister Monice called her simply a good girl, loving, funny, and a woman of God. But no one knew what Marissa had been hiding behind that smile. Martin Mendoza was her ex-boyfriend, or current boyfriend. The distinction would matter more than anyone realized, because Marissa was desperately trying to end what friends would later describe as a relationship built on control and fear. But Martin wasn't the type to let go easily. And then there was Jaslyn Gutierrez, Marissa's best friend, who carried a secret that would haunt her forever, the exact words Marissa had whispered to her just weeks before. But even Jaslyn couldn't imagine how prophetic those words would become. Saturday, June 28, 2025, 9:06 p.m. The plan was simple. Marissa would spend Saturday night with a friend and come home Sunday. Her text to her family was routine, almost mundane. "Hey, I'm staying with a friend tonight. I'll be home tomorrow." But Sunday came and went. No Marissa. Sunday, June 29, 2025, 9:45 a.m. The last time anyone would see Marissa DiNapoli alive was captured on a Ring camera at Martin Mendoza's house on Trail Drive. The timestamp reads 9:45 a.m. Marissa walks down the stairs carrying clothes, Mendoza beside her. Their conversation is unclear, but their body language speaks volumes. The audio captures a question that would become crucial evidence. Why would you text your ex? That single question, loaded with jealousy and control, would reveal the true nature of their relationship. What prosecutors would later discover is that Marissa appeared visibly apprehensive in that footage. Her demeanor wasn't just nervous, it was fearful. She knew something was wrong. The relationship between Marissa DiNapoli and Martin Mendoza was complex and volatile. While some reports identified Mendoza as her boyfriend at the time of her disappearance, others referred to him as her ex-boyfriend. This ambiguity reflected an on-again, off-again dynamic that friends would later clarify. Marissa was actively trying to break up with him at the time of her death. The underlying tension in their relationship was rooted in a history of alleged abuse. Prosecutors would later present compelling evidence that DiNapoli and Mendoza had an abusive relationship characterized by prior acts of domestic violence. These incidents were reportedly never reported to police, suggesting a pattern of hidden violence that Marissa endured in silence. Monday, June 30th, 2025. When Monday arrived and Marissa didn't show up for her shift at Starbucks, her family's worry transformed into panic. Calls went straight to voicemail. Text messages remained unread. Her phone, which had been her constant companion, fell silent. By evening, the Morgan Hill Police Department had officially classified 18-year-old Marissa DiNapoli as a missing person. In a town like Morgan Hill, where everyone knows everyone, 1 week feels like a lifetime when someone just vanishes. But Marissa hadn't simply vanished. The Ring camera footage, the cell phone data, and the pattern of abuse would all point to a much darker reality. The question captured on that surveillance audio, "Why would you text your ex?" wasn't just a moment of jealousy. It was the catalyst for a tragedy that her best friend had been dreading for weeks. Tuesday, July 1st, 2025. The first breakthrough came when Marissa's car was discovered unoccupied near Mendoza's home, the same location where she'd been last seen on surveillance footage. The discovery meant everything and nothing. It placed her at his house. But where was she now? Martin Mendoza was immediately named a person of interest. The problem? He was completely uncooperative with the police. Phone calls went unanswered. When investigators tried to speak with him in person, he offered no useful information. His behavior raised immediate red flags for detectives who were already suspicious of his role in Marissa's disappearance. Cell phone data revealed something chilling. On June 29th, the same day they were last seen together, both Marissa's and Mendoza's phones had pinged cell towers near Anderson Lake, a remote recreational area miles from town. The data placed them together in an area where there was no logical reason to be. Anderson Lake sits in a sprawling recreational area popular with hikers and campers, but it's also isolated enough that someone could disappear without a trace. The cell tower pings created a timeline that investigators found deeply troubling. Why would Marissa and Mendoza travel to such a remote location together? But cell phone data can only tell you where phones were, not what happened to the people carrying them. By the time investigators fully processed this information, Martin Mendoza had vanished too. The community mobilized with remarkable speed and determination. Teachers, classmates, and strangers joined the desperate search efforts. Marissa's teacher, Tara Guerrero, packed her SUV with candles and flowers, organizing vigils that drew hundreds of people from across Morgan Hill and neighboring communities. The Starbucks where Marissa worked closed out of respect, with flowers and notes piling up outside the entrance. Customers and co-workers alike left heartfelt messages, photos, and small mementos. The impromptu memorial grew larger each day, becoming a focal point for the community's grief and determination to find answers. Search teams combed through local parks, hiking trails, and waterways. Volunteers distributed flyers with Marissa's photo throughout the region. Social media campaigns spread her image across California and beyond. The Morgan Hill Police Department coordinated with neighboring jurisdictions, expanding the search radius as days passed without any sign of the missing teenager. But with each passing day, hope faded like the summer light over the Santa Clara Valley. The initial optimism that Marissa might be found safe began to give way to a more grim reality. Her family, friends, and the broader community began to prepare themselves for news that no one wanted to hear. The investigation was moving forward, but critical time was slipping away. Every hour that passed without finding Marissa meant the trail was growing colder, and the chances of a positive outcome were diminishing. She was just a good girl, Manice Ramirez, Marissa's sister, would later say, loving, funny, and a woman of God. The words came slowly, each one weighted with the kind of grief that makes simple sentences feel impossible. Manice had been the protective older sister, the one who had watched Marissa graduate high school just months earlier, full of dreams and possibilities. Now she was speaking about her in the past tense. Tara Guerrero, Marissa's teacher, remembered her differently, but just as fondly. She was full of potential, with a big heart, a kind soul, and an infectious smile. The educator had seen hundreds of students pass through her classroom over the years, but Marissa had been special. She was the kind of student who made teaching worthwhile, engaged, thoughtful, and genuinely kind to her classmates. The memorial outside the Starbucks where Marissa worked grew larger each day. Co-workers shared stories of her punctuality, her willingness to cover shifts for others, and her gentle way with difficult customers. Regular customers left notes remembering how she always remembered their usual orders and asked about their families. But while the public mourning continued, Marissa's family was documenting everything. They were taking notes, recording conversations, and keeping detailed records of their interactions with law enforcement. What they saw troubled them deeply. Missed opportunities, crucial delays, and what felt like a lack of urgency in the investigation. The family sensed something was wrong with how the case was being handled, something that went far beyond their daughter's disappearance. They were beginning to suspect that systemic issues within the police department had contributed to delays that could have been avoided. One family member never stopped believing they would find answers. They organized search parties when official efforts seemed insufficient. They contacted media outlets when they felt the case wasn't getting adequate attention. They researched missing person protocols and questioned why certain steps hadn't been taken. They just didn't know how devastating those answers would be when they finally came. Wednesday, July 2, 2025, Anderson Lake. The discovery came from an unexpected source. A community member operating a drone over the east side of Anderson Lake spotted something that shouldn't have been there. Human remains near the woodchopper's flat picnic area, under a bridge by the Anderson Dam. The location was remote, accessible only by hiking trails that wind through dense vegetation and rocky terrain. Anderson Lake, typically a place of recreation where families came to fish and camp, was about to become the center of a homicide investigation. The drone operator immediately contacted the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office, who notified Morgan Hill Police. Emergency vehicles began arriving at the scene within the hour, their flashing lights creating an odd contrast against the peaceful lakeside setting. But here's what makes this discovery even more heartbreaking. Marissa's family had been searching this exact area for days. They had organized their own search parties, walking the trails and scanning the shoreline with a desperation that official search efforts seemed to lack. They were so close to finding her themselves. The family's relentless search efforts highlighted what they would later claim was inadequate police response. While they were combing through difficult terrain on foot, official search teams had not yet expanded to cover the Anderson Lake area comprehensively. Thursday, July 3, 2025. The Santa Clara County coroner made it official. The body was 18-year-old Marissa DiNapoli. She was identified by the clothes she wore, the same outfit captured in that final surveillance footage from Mendoza's Ring camera, and by a distinctive black necklace with a cross that her family had described to police. The cross necklace was particularly significant to the family. It had been a gift, and Marissa wore it constantly. Seeing that familiar piece of jewelry confirmed their worst fears while providing the definitive identification that investigators needed. The location raised immediate questions. How does someone end up in such a remote area with no direct road access? The nearest parking was over a mile away through challenging hiking terrain. This wasn't a location someone would stumble upon by accident. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What really happened in those final hours? How did Marissa end up so far from civilization? But the identification was only the beginning. The autopsy would reveal something that transformed this missing person case into a brutal homicide investigation. Marissa DiNapoli had been stabbed 5 times in the back. 5 deliberate wounds that ended her life in one of the most brutal ways imaginable. The autopsy revealed a level of violence that shocked even experienced investigators. These weren't random strikes or wounds inflicted in a moment of panic. They were methodical, purposeful, and delivered with deadly intent. But the real bombshell wasn't how she died. It was what her best friend Jaslyn Gutierrez revealed to investigators after the body was found. "She told me he would kill her," Jaslyn said, her voice barely a whisper. "She said he would not stop, that he's obsessed with her, that he's crazy, and that he's willing to go to that extent." The words hung in the air like a death sentence that had been spoken weeks before it was carried out. Jaslyn had been carrying this terrible burden, knowing that her best friend feared for her life, but feeling powerless to prevent what seemed inevitable. Marissa had predicted her own death. She had told her best friend exactly what Martin Mendoza would do to her. The prediction was chillingly specific. Not just that he might hurt her, but that he would kill her, that his obsession would drive him to that extreme. The Ring camera footage from June 29th suddenly made perfect sense. When Mendoza asked, "Why would you text your ex?" it wasn't just a jealous boyfriend's question. It was the trigger that Marissa had been dreading, the moment when his obsession would turn deadly. Marissa's apprehensive demeanor in that surveillance video wasn't just nervousness, it was terror. She recognized the tone in his voice, the look in his eyes, the dangerous shift in his behavior that she had learned to fear. She knew she was in danger, and she was right. The revelation transformed everything investigators thought they knew about the case. This wasn't a crime of passion or a relationship dispute that got out of hand. This was a predicted murder, carried out exactly as the victim had feared it would be. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a forensic psychologist specializing in domestic violence, explains what investigators discovered about the relationship. This wasn't a crime of passion. The evidence shows a clear pattern of escalating control and abuse. The relationship between Marissa and Mendoza had all the hallmarks of an abusive dynamic. Prosecutors would later present evidence of an abusive relationship characterized by prior acts of domestic violence, incidents that were reportedly never reported to police. The pattern was there, hidden behind closed doors, just like in so many cases that end in tragedy. Dr. Martinez continues, "When victims tell their friends he's going to kill me, they're not being dramatic. They're recognizing escalation patterns that often culminate in lethal violence." Marissa's prediction was based on intimate knowledge of her abuser's behavior. The unreported incidents suggest that Marissa had been suffering in silence, possibly believing that the violence wasn't severe enough to involve authorities, or perhaps fearing that reporting would escalate Mendoza's behavior. This is a common pattern in domestic violence cases, where victims correctly perceive that leaving or seeking help might trigger the most dangerous response from their abuser. July 1st, 2025, San Isidro border crossing. While investigators were processing the crime scene at Anderson Lake, Martin Mendoza was driving a white Toyota Camry across the border into Mexico. The timing was not coincidental. He fled the day after Marissa was reported missing, before her body was even found. This immediately raised suspicions about premeditation. Why flee to Mexico unless you know exactly what investigators are going to find? Mendoza's departure wasn't the panicked flight of someone who had just learned about a missing person report. It was the calculated escape of someone who knew that a body would soon be discovered. The border crossing data showed that Mendoza had crossed at San Isidro around midday on July 1st. At that point, Marissa had been missing for less than 24 hours, officially, though her family had been searching for her since Sunday night. His immediate flight to Mexico suggested consciousness of guilt and knowledge of what investigators would eventually discover at Anderson Lake. Federal authorities would later track his movements through Mexico, where he apparently believed he could evade justice indefinitely. His decision to attempt re-entry into the United States just 1 week later would prove to be a fatal miscalculation. Marissa's family had a different theory about why Mendoza was able to escape so easily. In a powerful statement, they alleged something that would rock the investigation. "We believe racial and systemic bias contributed to their inaction, costing us precious time." According to the family, Morgan Hill police had actually confronted Mendoza in person early in the investigation, but did not arrest or detain him for questioning. They claimed he fled within hours of that encounter, directly implying that police inaction enabled his escape across the border. The family's allegations were specific and damaging. They asserted that officers had the opportunity to detain Mendoza when they first spoke with him, but chose not to take him into custody despite being the last person seen with the missing woman. This decision, they argued, allowed him to cross into Mexico before investigators had gathered enough evidence to arrest him. Police Captain Mario Ramirez responded, "We're not here to comment or judge the way someone grieves, and this is a very tough situation. They lost a loved one, so if the anger is towards us, then the anger is towards us." But the family's concerns remained unanswered. The family's accusations elevated the case beyond a simple murder investigation. They were alleging systemic failures that had potentially compromised public safety and allowed a suspected killer to escape justice, at least temporarily. The investigation became a multi-agency effort involving over 30 officers from the DA's office, Santa Clara County Sheriff's Department, FBI, and Homeland Security. The evidence was overwhelming. Surveillance footage, cell phone data, the flight to Mexico, and the victim's own prediction of her death. The Ring camera footage provided a clear timeline and captured the confrontational audio that would become central to the prosecution's case. The cell phone data placed both Marissa and Mendoza near Anderson Lake on the day she disappeared. His immediate flight to Mexico demonstrated consciousness of guilt. But perhaps the most damning evidence was Marissa's own words to her best friend. In domestic violence cases, victim statements are often the most powerful evidence, and Marissa had essentially provided her own testimony about what she believed Mendoza would do to her. The most damning evidence was yet to come. July 7 to 8, 2025, Calexico-San Isidro border. The manhunt ended exactly 1 week after Marissa's body was discovered. Martin Mendoza, believing he had successfully evaded justice, attempted to re-enter the United States through the Mexican border crossing. Federal officers were waiting. His arrest wasn't the result of brilliant detective work. According to Marissa's family, it was pure chance. He was only arrested by chance while trying to cross back into the U.S. a week after Marissa's death, they stated, suggesting his capture wasn't due to a targeted police operation. Mendoza's decision to return to the United States remains puzzling. After successfully fleeing to Mexico and evading capture for a week, why risk crossing back into a country where he was wanted for murder? Perhaps he believed enough time had passed, or maybe he underestimated the scope of the investigation. Whatever his reasoning, it proved to be a fatal miscalculation. Border Patrol agents had been alerted to watch for Mendoza and his white Toyota Camry. When he appeared at the checkpoint, attempting to re-enter the United States, federal officers were ready. His week of freedom in Mexico had come to an end. The arrest process was swift and efficient. Federal authorities took him into custody without incident, and he was quickly transferred from Imperial County to Santa Clara County for prosecution. The multi-agency manhunt that had involved over 30 officers from various law enforcement agencies had finally reached its conclusion. July 8, 2025. Santa Clara County Courthouse. The arraignment revealed the full scope of the charges: first-degree murder and use of a knife to commit murder. District Attorney Jeff Rosen's office moved swiftly, alleging that Mendoza had stabbed Marissa 5 times in the back. The first-degree murder charge indicated that prosecutors believed the killing was premeditated, not a spontaneous act of violence. The additional charge of using a knife to commit murder carried its own enhanced penalties, reflecting the brutal nature of Marissa's death. But Mendoza's behavior in court spoke volumes about his character. He refused to enter a plea, forcing the court to enter a not guilty plea on his behalf. More telling, he failed to step inside the courtroom where friends and family of DiNapoli were seated. His refusal to face Marissa's family demonstrated either cowardice or a complete lack of remorse for his alleged actions. The courtroom was filled with people whose lives had been forever changed by his actions, and he couldn't bring himself to look at them. Manice Ramirez, Marissa's sister, was there to see justice begin. Her words cut through the legal proceedings. Even his imprisonment will never feel right because Marissa is still gone, and he doesn't even deserve that. The pain in her voice was unmistakable. For Marissa's family, no punishment could ever truly balance the scales of justice. Their sister, daughter, and friend was gone forever, and no legal outcome could bring her back. The judge denied Mendoza bail, citing both the severity of the charges and his demonstrated flight risk. His week-long escape to Mexico had proven that he was willing and able to flee the jurisdiction when facing serious charges. If you're still watching, you're one of us. Hit that like button and share this case because Marissa's story needs to be heard. Mendoza was remanded to Santa Clara County Jail, where he would await his preliminary hearing set for September 9th. The legal process that would determine his fate was just beginning, but for Marissa's family, seeing him in custody was the first step toward justice. The violent death of Marissa DiNapoli sent shockwaves through Morgan Hill that are still felt today. She was remembered as a vibrant member of the community with a bright future ahead of her. The local high school brought in grief counselors to help students process the loss of someone who had graduated just months earlier. The Starbucks where she worked became an impromptu memorial site, with flowers, photos, and heartfelt notes covering the entrance. But Marissa's family refused to let their daughter's death become just another tragedy. They specifically declined GoFundMe campaigns, focusing instead on dignity and justice. Their fight extends beyond convicting Mendoza. They continue to call for an independent investigation into the Morgan Hill Police Department's handling of the case. Their allegations of racial and systemic bias have elevated this case from a singular tragedy to a broader conversation about police accountability and the protection of vulnerable communities. The question they're asking isn't just who killed Marissa. It's who failed to protect her. The family's claims that police had opportunities to detain Mendoza before he fled to Mexico have sparked community discussions about law enforcement procedures and response protocols. They argue that crucial time was lost due to inadequate police action, time that might have prevented Mendoza's escape and ensured faster justice for their daughter. As Mendoza awaits trial, the legal process continues. His preliminary hearing is scheduled for September 9, 2025, marking the next phase in what promises to be a lengthy legal battle. But for Marissa's family, justice means more than a conviction. It means ensuring that the next young woman who tells her best friend, "He's going to kill me," gets the protection she deserves. The case has become a catalyst for discussions about domestic violence prevention and recognition of warning signs. Marissa's prediction of her own death highlights how victims often understand their danger better than the systems designed to protect them. Community advocates have used Marissa's story to push for better training of law enforcement officers in recognizing domestic violence escalation patterns. They argue that when someone explicitly states they fear their partner will kill them, that statement should trigger immediate protective interventions. The story of Marissa DiNapoli serves as a stark reminder that domestic violence warning signs are often hidden in plain sight, spoken aloud by victims who know exactly what's coming but can't find a way to escape it. Subscribe to TCI Crime Stories for more cases that demand justice, and tell us in the comments, what would you investigate next? Sometimes the most tragic stories are the ones where everyone saw the ending coming, but no one could rewrite it.